Welcome to An Unconventional Life, a podcast where we share stories about the crazy 1% out there who earned their doctoral degrees and then went on to use them in crazy, cool, unique, and unconventional ways. Here's your host, astrophysicist turned teacher, author, dissertation coach, and more, Dr. Russell Strickland.
Hi, and welcome to An Unconventional Life. This is your host, Dr. Russell Strickland, and I have with me today Dr. William Berry. I'm not kidding you guys. I'm really excited about that. Dr. Berry is a former visiting professor from the United States Military Academy in West Point. Pretty cool, right? He's a TEDx speaker. Pretty cool. And he is also an emerging technology ethicist. And what that means for you and I is he does robot philosophy, robot ethics. He has a robot actually behind him. If you're on YouTube, I don't know if we're going to get to talk to the robot at all or not, but if you're watching us on YouTube, it's out there hanging out over his shoulder right now. I can't wait to have this conversation. It sounds like it's going to be a blast. Dr. Berry, thank you so much for joining me here today.
Hi, Dr. Russell Strickland. I'm so excited to be on your show. I listen to your show, so I'm a fan. So I'm really happy to be here, and this is great. I love your show. It's fantastic.
All right. I have got to mark this down on my calendar. I have a fan on my show. That's the first, I think. Want to let everybody know that today's episode is brought to you by Dissertation Done. And Dissertation Done, what we do is we help adult doctoral students who are going through the dissertation process or about to start that process. We help them get through the dissertation as quickly as possible so that you can move on to living your unconventional life. So whether you are getting ready to start the dissertation process, you want to be proactive, you're maybe struggling through this thing and you need some help, or you're fed up with it and you're thinking about quitting and you want to be pulled back off the ledge, reach out to me at dissertationdone.com/done, and we'll talk about whether you might be a good fit for our Fast Track Your Dissertation coaching program. And if you are out there in the expert space and you want to expand your authority, bring more people to you, having a first name doctor is great. Having a published book is even better. And so we'll help you get from a blank page to becoming a published author in no time. Reach out to me at dissertationdone.com/book to do that. Dr. Berry, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm looking around at all the cool stuff you've got going on back here. I see a book that we're going to talk about in a minute, a robot we're going to probably be talking about quite a lot. Before we get into that, though, you actually had quite a unique story about your dissertation. So tell folks a little bit about that. You actually went to grad school in England, correct?
Yes, Russell, if I had known about your service, I would have hired you. Currently, my partner, Maria, is finishing up her doctorate in the last couple of weeks. When she found out about the show and listened to your show, she said, I would have hired Russell, so you would have had a lot of business, and I could have turned you on a lot of my friends, because a lot of people drop out of the thesis at the very end. And it's very sad to see, because you're 6-7 months away. Yeah. And you can see it for the other person, but they can't see it for themselves. So what you offer for service is something I think is important, and I could have used it. But yeah, my journey was interesting. I grew up in New England, in Connecticut, and got my master's in 6th year at Sacred Heart University in Connecticut. Joined a Learned Society, and in that Learned Society, they started this agreement with a school in England, Lancaster University. So we went over there, and we interviewed, and England's a little different. You actually very different than America. It's self-taught. So you go over there, you find a committee. You have to find people who like you, or perhaps don't like you, but want to disprove it. But you get this committee together, 3 to 5 people, and they become your team. And that team stays with you for about 3 years. You pass the exam internally. They send your thesis out to an expert in Europe.
Right.
And then that expert shows up who you have no idea what they're like. And they grill you. And the idea is you're not going to win. You just want a tie at the end. Your committee chairs can do nothing. And they have people from different departments. I was education, had a guy from physics, business, and a social worker in the room. And here I am talking about educational leadership and quality. So as far as the process, I'm at Lancaster University. Turnover after turnover. I've went through 5 thesis supervisors, which is almost unheard of. And the stories were like a soap opera. I mean, if I had a reality show, it went from one person, I'm an American, I'm Democratic Constitution, happened to have one teacher that was a diehard communist. It just really was difficult for us to find a concept of quality that worked for each other, because I was doing a thesis on what is the meaning of quality off Robert Piercing's book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
Okay.
Then I had the next gentleman had an affair with the dean's wife, moves over to France and starts a winery. So that didn't bode well. And then from there, just committee members going to different universities, and so what happened was I ended up having no committee. And when there was no committee, there's no one left to examine you. So I had passed my internal exams. So I'm just waiting for my final exam. That's it, 6 months to go.
The first committee member you mentioned, did you turn him communist?
No.
So you pushed one guy away to start a vineyard. Another guy is going out. We, when my daughter finished elementary school, 6 years, K through 5, the last day of 5th grade, I took her around the school in the morning before school started, and we got pictures of her with each and every one of her teachers. It was so cool. We teased my son, who was a year older than her, mercilessly about that because of his 6 teachers. I think like 2 of them were left. We kept saying he was like chasing them all away because they had him in his class, in their class, and then they were gone. They were somewhere else.
And that's what happens. I happen to have one gentleman that stayed with me the whole way.
Yeah.
And he happened to be a Buddhist and a socialist, so we didn't see the same way philosophically, maybe politically, but we really, shared the same values underneath it. Yeah. And so I had one supporter, and I think that's the key to the thesis is you have to have that support. And in this case, Russell, when you work with people, you become that support. So this gentleman, Frank Ledwith, stayed with me at Lancaster. I basically did a train tour. I got my thesis, got on a train, and I started looking for advisors because that's what you do in England. You need an advisor. So I ended up at Nottingham Trent University, fantastic university in England. And again, Frank stayed with me as my reference. It was like a consultant. And staying there, I was able to finish up, lived in Sherwood Forest, which was pretty interesting when they were doing the Robin Hood movie with Russell Crowe. And at the end of the day, was able to really actually enjoy the process because I was surrounded by a very nurturing team, Sue Wallace. And at the time, Maria, my wife, was just such a great partner. And I think that was the key, was having a partner right here in my home and then travel with me and stayed with me in England and really just was there every day to say you could do it. And at the end of the day, I was really pleased to be able to finish the thesis, especially I had loved this book, Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. And I really wanted to solve, can we have this understanding of quality, a framework, and created this thing called TQ theory. And it's been the basis of my career since then and brought me to ways like, for instance, this robot behind me, all the result of a thesis about what does quality mean and how can we talk to each other. So my journey was interesting to say the least. Lastly, while I was in England, I ran into the Queen on the road. I was going to Starbucks. I happened to actually run into her car and she looked right at me. I actually saw the Olympic torch and got to touch it in my hand. So there was a lot of experiences that happened when you're doctorate that you never could imagine could happen. And
English
the journey is definitely
little idioms and euphemisms and so forth. What does ran into her car mean?
Well, literally, it's get out of the early morning, running to Starbucks, not paying attention, and the car going very slowly and bumping into the car and looking at the window.
Queen gets out and you're exchanging like license and insurance information or something.
I got the little wave. We had that eye contact for a moment. I mean, I'm somewhere in her consciousness. We saw each other. It's just interesting in England. Right? Here in America, there'd be a lot of police officers.
Yeah.
One gentleman's like, "Oh, hey, if you could just move away from the car, please, sir." It's like, it's the Queen. So, the thesis can be a great, it's a great adventure. You got to go into it with you have to have a sense of humor, and you have to have it because you're either going to cry or you're going to laugh. And
it's life, and a sense of humor is the best way to approach life. I mean, it's easy to take ourselves seriously and sometimes too seriously, but you've got to look at this whole thing as absurd and have as much fun with it as you can.
Yeah, definitely. So the journey was different. Especially having advisors, but all those things I watched, I think it was about 50 people with me and about 4 of us actually made it. 2 of the people had to come back. They failed their Viva and had to come back the next year. And the people that left were in many regards much more intelligent than me. It's just a matter of resilience. So I actually go back to my Catholic school and my football coaches and rugby and my parents, and it's resilience. And where, can you dig deep? Right. Because a lot of us are not used to being, for lack of a better word, just really deconstructed. We get a lot of feedback at work, but we get good reviews. It's always, and in the thesis, you actually are going to be brought down to your knees and realize, I don't know. And to sit in a room and say in front of people, I don't know, that my friends, were helping me said, now you've started your thesis. Now you're a doctorate student because you finally realize you don't know. And I think that was a critical moment for me in my growth as a human being as well, and being a better teacher and being even now a better writer.
I think it is very, very important. I TA'd when I was so I've shared on the blog, on the podcast before that originally I went to graduate school in astronomy and astrophysics. I was at the University of Chicago, all sorts of brilliant people walking around there. They were amazing. And one of the professors that I TA'd for, he said something when we were walking back to, from the lecture hall to the department about how an undergraduate professor's job is to teach students so that they graduate thinking they know everything. And a graduate professor's job is to teach students so they graduate realizing they know nothing. And obviously the graduate students know a lot more than the undergraduate students, but the realization that what you know, as opposed to all the things that are out there that we could conceivably know. I mean, we might get into some sort of discussion later on about how much is knowable, but there are certainly a lot of things that we think as humans are knowable, and we don't know any of them when it comes to that. It's a drop in the bucket, a drop in the ocean, what we know versus what we could know eventually as people.
Russell, I love that, because at the end of the day, it's being a curious being. I mean, when you're a curious being, as an astrophysicist, right? That's the essence, right, I think a good astrophysicist is that you have to be curious. And I don't know any job that you really are going to be good at that if you don't have curiosity, that you're not going to be able to not only just excel at it, but have this sense of, you got to be able to satisfy that inner yearning inside, I'm really on this journey. I'm not just kind of performing, going to work 9 to 5. So as a curious being, I found the thesis both during the time, once I had a permanent place and people weren't running away, but once I kind of had that team and I found my tribe, that made all the difference. And so as a curious being now, I find that, even during COVID-19 hasn't amputated my curiosity. It hasn't amputated my ability to find joy every day. Right. It's made it more difficult. But I find that COVID-19 really was a time of digging deep and finding out, what are you made out of? Because it's, each day kind of had a nice schedule going. Things were going well. COVID-19 comes around now, boy, I just decided to go from full-time academic to like a goodwill entrepreneur. Right. All my gigs are canceled. All my speaking things are canceled. What are you going to do? You're going to follow up, sit downstairs and weep? No, instead of that, started an LLC, started a company, wrote a children's book, Robot Ranger behind me, and started really expanding goodwill beyond just being a teacher in my classroom. I was just teaching the class, but COVID-19, I've lost weight during COVID-19. No drinking of alcohol during COVID-19. So I found this to be a time of being healthier, both mentally and physically, but it's a choice that you make every day you wake up. And today, California, we're back on lockdown, no schools. We're back to where we were in March. And you can wake up and be sad, or you can wake up and say, hey, right now, my mother-in-law's got COVID, my brother, my sister-in-law, cousins. And, you say your prayers and you just be the best you can, but you can't, if you're going to, survive this in a way that you're going to be intact and grow human being, you got to really embrace this resiliency and this concept of being curious every day. So that's my take on.
That's just a true statement about life. I think that there are so many people who kind of sleepwalk almost through life. This is what I'm doing. When that was taken away, they don't know what to do from there. I'm involved in a mastermind, this group of entrepreneurs where we're all kind of solopreneurs, or at least we're obviously the head of the business. It's not, people that run major companies, but, small businesses, solopreneur type businesses. And we talked a lot about what are you going to do? The word we used was pivot, because so many of us are doing things that might involve working with people. A lot of my work was already remote, but I had to decide as students were starting to worry about their jobs and should I stay in school because of financial issues? Can I afford support because of, maybe my job won't be here soon? I had to think about what else could I do to serve my community. And when I see people who are out there, the phrase I like to use is self-medicating with Netflix. Basically, they're just letting that roll over. And yes, you maybe have watched everything on the recommended list, but have you accomplished anything? Did that make your life actually better in any real way? Probably not. But if you do something like what we pivoted to, is get out there and write your book. If you can't get your dissertation finished, as a student, which we still are working with people to do that, can you, as an expert who's already finished your dissertation, get yourself to the next level by writing a book, getting published, so that when we get through this COVID-19 thing, everybody else is waking up from the Netflix stupor and wondering, oh, what year is it? And meanwhile, you're a published author, or you finished your dissertation or something. There's big accomplishments on the list.
Russell, that's so, and you really have to be self-directed. I mean,
yes,
people have their opinion of what you should do. And I think, again, if you're going to be successful at your thesis, at the end of the day, it's an individual journey. I mean, you have a lot of support, but at the end of the day, it's you in a room and a typewriter or whatever you're using, your laptop, notes, and you're by yourself. And at the end of the day, you're going to defend it by yourself. And the same goes during this COVID time. I mean, here I was, visiting professor at West Point. Mm-hmm. I was honored to win the Army Achievement Patriotic Award. Jobs were aplenty to go to.
Right.
And instead, what do? Someone offers me this incredible robot back here. It's conversational AI, and says, hey, we heard that you want to follow Asimov's new teacher and bring it to life to eradicate educational poverty. And I'm like, yeah. And so here's this, my whole thesis was about improving educational quality.
Right.
And someone gives it to me, and I'm like, well, am I going to just go, and now I got my professorship, I can just put the years in, write my books, get the rocking chair, talk about Aristotle? Or, hey, I started this company, Creative Society Media. We're doing small smartphone film festivals. We got the robot, write the book. And then, of course, COVID hits, and people are like, you think that was a good decision? And the answer is, yeah, I do. Is it going to be tough? It's absolutely been tough. Not having that nice check and the healthcare all covered.
Right.
But you know what? I mean, life's a one-time shot here. And, I'm going to try to take every adventure I can find. And again, it's informed optimism. To be like your thesis, right? Optimism is overrated, right? Informed optimism is fantastic. So it's great to say, you're going to be on a boat. Informed optimism is, oh yeah, I think we can put the hole in it. But if there's a huge hole and it's sinking, and you keep saying, oh no, we're going to be fine. That's not a good idea, because you will find yourself in the water. So yeah,
I kind of liken that to some kids these days have a lot of self-esteem, but not a lot of self-confidence, because self-confidence is built on the back of experience, usually failure and then overcoming failure. And self-esteem is just someone telling you you're good enough. and that doesn't mean anything ultimately. So if you get these kids that think that they're great, and then eventually they go out there in the world and find out that it's tough, you want to have self-confidence more so than self-esteem.
Russell, don't you see that in the work you're doing with people with the thesis that that's self-confidence? You can question all things about, and it is very much a questioning of yourself and who you are. It's a real identity crisis in a way, because who am I? What is this all about? I mean, as an astrophysicist, that adds in the dimension.
Yeah.
But that confidence, and I think that's what the doctorate does for you. And I've heard some of your other guests talk about that.
I would go further and say that you have to. So the doctorate challenges you, right? It makes you, as you said, question yourself, question your identity, all of these things. One of the things that we do with our students is tell them, but wait, you are, unlike, when I first went to graduate school, I was a traditional doctoral student, which means high school, college, straight into graduate school on that academic career path. The folks that I work with now have established careers by the time they're going into graduate school, and they've done a lot and they've accomplished a lot. And that's one of the things we talk to students about when they're suffering some of these confidence crises is, think back about all the things you've done. You're not here accidentally. You're here very purposely. You've made lots of decisions that have gotten you here, and you failed before. You may not recognize it as such now because you overcame that failure. But the fact is, most of our lives, particularly for folks who are successful, are a series of failures punctuated with occasional successes. And it's those successes that we like to remember, but it's the failures that got you there.
Russell, I think you make a great, and going back to the thesis, I mean, this is the core of what you do and what we're talking about. One of the things I found is that you have to have that self-confidence when you choose your methodology.
Yeah.
I found watching, and I've helped a few folks through the end of their doctorate get through, these committees a lot of times will try to push you outside the methodology that you really feel is the best way to do it. And really, at the end of the day, your subject matter better than anybody else.
Sure.
Right? That when you finish that thesis, at least for that 10 seconds, you're the smartest person in the world, right? As soon as you walk out the door, someone else takes that mantle.
Right.
But I found the methodology so often, you want to do a phenomenological or hermeneutic qualitative study, and you have someone on your committee that's a math person that says, well, no, we want some quantitative in there. And so you give into that person, only to find out 2 years later, it doesn't fit with your study. It's throwing your, for instance, quality of life. If you really want to get deep descriptions, the survey method's really not going to get you there. And you're going to have to defend yourself against somebody who maybe believes that only quantitative data is science. And so, like, for instance, in my wife's sense, she's doing existential phenomenology. There was a lot of pushback the entire time. So what's the quantitative aspect? There isn't one. It's deep description. I'm going to spend a lot of time with people. I'm going to dig deep into what their story is. And I'm going to try to give you the best I can from a phenomenological perspective, what's happening here. And that's so valuable. And I think when people get into the thesis, so often they fall into the survey, case study. They fall into these areas that they just go, okay, fine, not realizing, well, yes, you're going to be stuck with that for the next 2 to 3 years. So you better be sure that this methodology not only is a good approach, but one you're not going to get bored with. And for me, I love learning from other people. So deep description and the getting into like a phenomenological hermeneutic study, I love it. But I think that's a very important part of your thesis because it happens fairly early on.
It does.
And then you find yourself in your literature review going, why did I do that? All because you didn't stand up to the one person on the committee and saying, but if you're going to stand up to the committee, you better know your stuff. And you better know you better know the method and why your approach is a superior or is at least a valid way to do it.
And with what you're saying there, I think what students need to realize is that you need to be aware of your own goals and objectives. You need to be strategic about how you're approaching the dissertation project, and you need to make sure that your dissertation is helping you accomplish those goals and objectives. Obviously, if you're going to be building off of this research and this is what you're allowing your career to blossom into, then you want to take your time with it. You want to make sure that you're doing all those things that you just said. If, however, what your goal is to graduate, and your dissertation ultimately won't matter past then, which a lot of professionals, that's the case. They need that credential, showing that you can do the research, showing that you can get it done, and then getting that dissertation published so that you can move on is the goal. And so it's important to make sure that as you're making these decisions, you're always doing it with the end in mind. My kids went to an elementary school that used Dr. Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People as their framework for their pedagogy, which I loved. And we talk about that with our students a lot, particularly that habit number 2, begin with the end in mind. Where do you want to go? What do you want to get out of this? Now let's make sure we're mapping your journey so that it's consistent and authentic with your goals, where you want to go.
See, Russell, that's where we're a good team, right? So Russell, you're helping them get to the goal, right? And that's the philosophy side of me.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it as well as that your responsibility, though, from a communal perspective, is that you're contributing to the world's knowledge. And so when I see theses that I do read, yes, the person got their doctorate and met their goal, but their thesis is proving something that is not true.
Yeah.
Like it's a leadership concept, and you go, well, that just doesn't ring true.
Yeah.
And there was a guy in a thesis, I forgot what it was about, but it was about some group of people somewhere, and then about 5 years later, he said, oh, by the way, none of that worked. I got my thesis, it's good. So there is that part that you have, there is a responsibility for people that are going into the thesis to realize, even if you're just getting it to get it because you want to do the journey or you have a credential for work,
right?
That unlike, for instance, your MBA and your master's, where you're going in to get that credential, when you're in the level of a doctorate, you are contributing to the world knowledge about something. And that is a large responsibility that I don't always hear people talking about. I do hear about their goals, what they're going to get done.
Right.
But when I ask sometimes, so how is that going to contribute to nursing? Or how is that going to contribute to leadership? Like you said, Stephen Covey, how is that going to contribute to leadership? And I'm very surprised sometimes when it's like, well, I just, for my job, I need this. And I understand that. But I think it's equally important that we do take a breath and realize how, what is it, about 3% of the world population has a doctorate degree?
Closer to 1.
Well, that's all what is that?
It's closer to 1. In the U.S.,
closer to 1.
It's closer to 1.
Yeah.
If you look at the census numbers, it bounces around a little bit, but it's closer to 1. I think it's been below 2 for at least the last, well, it was a couple of years since I've last looked at it, but for about 10 years back from that, I think it stayed below 2.
So Russell, if we're in this 1%, and we're responsible, we have to be better than that. I think we have to be better than just saying, yeah, I got my doctorate and then I'm going to do this and that. There has to be some sort of sense of responsibility that I do, or I am responsible for either promoting progress in the world, or I'm not. I mean, it's not bad to go backwards if you're questioning something, but things can be regressive. I mean, when you talk about education, when I see, theses that are continually promoting, for instance, banking education, where kids are just sitting there, but they go, but look, the goal setting's really working. Yeah, you've mixed goals with a really bad pedagogy, and then you're promoting that. Or, human basic needs. We keep talking about Maslow's needs, right? Maslow never meant it to be the framework for human needs for everyone. It was based on 19 people. It was all white people, 2 women. And when you look at it as a valid and reliable framework, it's not. But it gets repeated thesis after thesis because it becomes sort of, hey, it's just accepted. Instead of saying, hey, there's like a guy named Glasser, love, power, fun, freedom, and survival. And there's a lot more research behind it. So that's an example of like when I go in front of crowds of people, educators, I'll say, your basic needs, what do you base it on? Literally 99% Maslow. And you're going, how has this stayed in education so long in theses? Why? Because I got a thesis in Maslow, I'm an advisor, and I just pass it down, and someone has to break the cycle. And that's an example that I bring up that I would argue that anyone who just says that Maslowian concept of needs and it's hierarchical is definitely under question. I mean, just common sense. People that are saints, and we sacrifice all kinds of things for love, right? We don't eat, we give up our survival. So right there, we know the hierarchy doesn't work. Doing your thesis itself is evidence that the hierarchy doesn't work because you don't eat. You say, I'm paying $60,000. I'm living in a shack. Why am I doing a doctorate? Right. So, that's an example of a responsibility that if we keep promoting these myths, like when I believe that Maslow's thing, it's helpful, but it's still a myth, that we do great damage to the community of knowledge, and we hurt young people that are learning. So that's just one example. So I know it's a little philosophical, Russell, compared to finishing, but I think it's important that we take that responsibility.
Yeah, it is important that, and if you mentioned earlier on that maybe there's some guy who said, oh, I did this for my thesis, and then 5 years later he's saying none of that worked out. I think that's perfectly fine, except you need to be able to say that in the dissertation. You should know in the dissertation, here's what we did, and it doesn't look like it worked out. Or it looks like it's promising, we don't know, let's investigate more. Those are ways of moving the kind of the boundaries of knowledge forward. But putting something out there that you claim is correct when you don't know, again, very important to know what you know and what you don't know. But putting something out there that you claim is correct when you don't know, that's dangerous. And but I tell my students all the time, the result is the result. Win, lose, or draw. You write it up and you get your thesis, because that's the goal in this endeavor. That's the goal, is to do the research and get an answer. Now, if you're going into academia, they've got another set of criteria that they use, because if you don't find something interesting, no one's going to want to hire you. You're just not sexy, and somebody else who found something is going to be considered more a better candidate to bring in. They're going to be considered a better candidate for getting grant money and all of those sorts of things. So they do play by a slightly different set of rules there. But still, ultimately, if you were a hotshot academic and what you worked on for your thesis didn't work out, but you were brilliant in the way that you investigated it, you should be just fine to move forward in your career, and you'll work on something else that maybe won't work out or maybe will. But you're still expanding the boundaries of knowledge, both in things that we know and things we know not to be true. Both of those things are knowledge.
You reframed that really well, Russell, and I like the way you said that. At the end of the day, I think I'm probably a better way to say it after your reframe is that you just want to be able to look in the mirror and feel that I did this ethically, you know, and that, so I think that's a better way. So, I mean, as I was waxing on a little bit philosophically, and I do believe in that, at the end of the day, just make sure that it was ethical. And I will let you know, Russell, my thesis at the end of the day was about failure, that I failed. I was a high school principal. I had studied. I had done all this stuff and made all these moves. The school had things had happened to improve student learning. But as far as leadership, it ends with me basically saying, my superintendent was fired unfairly, the head of special ed, and I resigned. And then at the end of the day, I failed as a leader. And so that's how my thesis ends, which, again, is not the usual ending to a thesis. That look at all these great things, and I failed. But it was about where do we go from that failure? Because the failure was that the journey that I was taking to the mountaintop, just simply a couple of trees had fallen and I needed to go around them. Mm-hmm. But I was very honest that the trees had fallen and that I couldn't do that. And I know that there was a moment there in the thesis writing where you say to yourself, you know, I could just kind of end right here and it'll sound quite brilliant. Or, hey, you know, there's nothing wrong with saying and being honest that this didn't work. But look where it brought us. It brought us to a new route. So I found that the committee, which I was very nervous about, to say that I had, again, you know, failure is just another opportunity a lot of times. Right. That's what this was. But I like what you just said. I think it's being ethical, being willing to, and being fair. If it didn't work, say why it didn't work, because you're going to save someone else that journey of making the same mistake. So, I like that. I like the way you reframe that.
And another thing that in kind of the real world in research that is true is that some truly brilliant, great research comes up with answers, but most good research develops more questions than answers. Developing a good question and throwing it out there and letting the dogs tear the meat off the bone is every bit as valuable as actually finding something out and figuring something out. Because this is generally a process. I mean, there we can start talking about sort of philosophy of knowledge and so forth. You know, I have this thought, you know, kind of like Plato's allegory of the cave, that there's truth out there, but everything that we do in science is an approximation of that truth, and we can get better and better and better at it. But I kind of think that getting to that truth in some sense is like an asymptotic adventure or goal. We're never going to get there. We'll get closer and closer and closer and closer, so that science is never over. You know, there was I don't remember his name, but there was a physicist back around the turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th, that said, listen, physics is done. There's like these, I don't remember what it was, 5 or 6 things that we needed to learn how to do. And once we figure out these 5 or 6 things, we can pack it up. We're done. Well, one of the things, the answer to that thing was quantum mechanics. So boom, we have a whole new understanding of the world that we still don't fully understand. Another one, I don't remember, it might have been the precession of Mercury's orbit, might have been another one. So that was relativity. Einstein's theory of relativity was the answer to that one. And, you know, it's just hubris to say, okay, we've got it all and we're here. I think there's always going to be more to know than we do know. That's, you know, kind of my thought philosophically about it.
I agree. And that's why, you know, I asked, what is the meaning of quality? You know, and when you look at what is the meaning of quality, I'm still working on it. So what I did was I was really excited about the thesis because I got to formally explore a question that I really love to explore, talk to thousands of people, you know, about this concept of quality. And still today, I'm still doing my thesis today. I'm still talking to people. So what does that mean when you said that, you know, that was quality, or, you know, especially with these elections going on? And I hear people saying, we did a quality job here calling the ballots. You go, yeah, I'd like to know what that meant. What does that mean, quality? Yeah. So I found that, you know, that one of the most fun things I think about the thesis process was finding that question that just kind of sings to your heart. Because if you find that, I can just say from my own personal experience, it's a lifetime. Right. I've been with the same question now for, 15 years, and it's still with me every day. It's behind all my writing, it's behind my teaching, and it drives me. So I'm constantly looking at, what is the meaning of quality? When I'm talking to someone else, am I meeting their quality needs? What do these people think my sense of quality is? What am I portraying myself? So that leads you to all kinds of different explorations. So I love that. I think that finding the question that you personally are deeply interested in will make the thesis process much more enjoyable. And I think optimizes your success rather than having this artificial question from the outside that maybe a committee member, and they will do that, right? They'll kind of, they'll say, what do you think of this question? And if you're not going to speak up for yourself, you go, okay, because it may further that professor's work, right? And I think that's one of the problems with the thesis is a lot of times, I shouldn't say a lot of times in my experience, people are doing theses that are helping the committee or people on the committee more than it's about your work. And I think when you have a good committee, they're about you. They want you to succeed and they build off it. And that's why it's so important to really find the right school, find a committee that you can work with and that you are able to take feedback from. Again, right, Russell? If you cannot take feedback, you're not going to make it. And taking feedback in a thesis is feedback like you've never had before in an academic level. I mean, your master's your master's prepares you maybe academically. I don't think anything prepares you better than, being in a long-term relationship with your wife or something. That prepares you very well for feedback.
That's true. What you said, I think, is 100% true, given the context of what you want to accomplish. So you have to make sure that you're making those decisions. When you say find the right university, it's not a question of, is this the right university, right or wrong, black and white. Is it the right fit for you? Is it going to help you accomplish your goals? Is it going to create what you want? The statement you made a little bit ago about the thesis often helping the committee, I think that in most traditional universities, that's 100% true, because it goes back to this notion from the Middle Ages of the master-apprentice relationship. And that's what traditional doctoral students do, is they do their master's work for a period of time. They start literally writing the papers. They're contributing to the papers at first without attribution. Then they're writing the papers without attribution. Eventually they write the papers with attribution. Then they get to actually claim authorship of the papers. And then they get to do their dissertation and head out. And it's very much, it was born of that at that time, this master-apprentice relationship. So you are literally doing your advisor's work for a certain period of time as you go through that process, if you're in a traditional university, traditional academic setting.
That's why it's important. People think, I've got to go to Yale or University of Chicago, go here. It's much better to find a university that you fit with and that you can feel comfortable. Because at the end of the day, when I interview people, when I was back a long time ago, I was a high school principal. I can tell you that I don't remember any Ivy League teachers beating state school teachers to get the job. The Yale people at Harvard, they'd be on the top of the pile, right? But at the end of the day, you had to perform. And again, this isn't I'm not ripping on that. What happened was a lot of the people at the Ivies were doing curriculum. They really knew the knowledge. But when it came to pedagogy and teaching, the other candidates were more well-rounded. So I always had it on the top. It was the classic school, Stanford. I saw that they always made it through the pile.
Right.
And in the final, and then it just, lo and behold, it just happened to be that none of them, throughout my years hiring, got the job only because it's about teaching. So when you get your degree and you go out there, I think it levels the playing field. I'm out there. When I was at Oxford not too long ago at Pembroke College as an emerging technology ethicist, I'm surrounded by Oxford graduates, right? So, Nottingham Trent's a good university. I think it's ranked in the top 20 or something, but it's Oxford. And plus I'm an American. So you're an American at Oxford.
Right.
And you're sitting there, you know what? We've got the same letters after our name. We went through the same process. We had Vivas, we went through that. So you can sit there confident and going, no matter where you went to school, and I went to school, as long as it's accredited, we went through the same process. Right. We're in the same 1% club.
Right.
But there is still, and I see this in folks that didn't go to maybe a tier 1 school, the idea that, I didn't get a doctorate. Don't get over that. That is no longer, maybe when you're 18, 19, fine, you went to there. But you got your doctorate, and if you did a good thesis, that thesis will stand up at any school. And you should feel very confident in any room to talk. And I think that's one of the things
you have to recognize what you're trying to do, what you want to accomplish, and make sure that you are accomplished in those areas. Because Everyone has strengths. Everyone has weaknesses. You don't go out there trying to remediate your weaknesses to get ahead in life. You play to your strengths. And so
Yes.
these folks who are, well, quite honestly, if I understood you correctly, you were talking about a bunch of people who went to tier 1 research universities who were applying for positions that were primarily about teaching.
Yes.
Their strength was probably research. They probably should have been applying for positions that were primarily about research.
Correct.
And then you don't. It becomes very hard to leak them on the pile. You can do it because academia, we all take shortcuts, right? We all have issues with stereotyping and this sort of thing. When you see an Ivy League resume, you're thinking automatically, this guy's going to be good. But he's still got to say something at some point. My mom used to say it's better to what was it? It's better to sit there and let people think you're stupid than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. At some point, even if people think you're brilliant, you have to open your mouth and back it up. And if you can, great. If you can't, that's a problem.
And that's, I think right now, I would struggle a little bit. Right now, there are some really online opportunities with COVID happening right now. Some people that want to do doctorates say, well, all I can go is this school or that school. These Ivy League schools now are going to online degrees at different levels. And we see a move toward that. So I think people that maybe, and it's hard to go to the classroom, right? You have a family, you've got a job. I think online is going to open up fantastic opportunities for more people to go for the doctorate. And they're going to need more people like yourself, Russell, to help them because it'll be even more different. And I think people may have the misnomer, you did an online program? I think that's a lot harder than having the support of a team around me where I can call and see them and get a pat on the back every now and then, or just have a cup of coffee or tea. So online,
from that standpoint, it unquestionably is. The fact is that most traditional doctoral students are going to an office, a lab, whatever it is. In my case, it was like an office in the basement. And there were like 3 other, I think we shared it with, there was 3 or 4 students in that particular office. And then when I started going, being associated with the research group, I had an office on the first floor. So it wasn't in the basement, but it was still, an office on an inner corridor. So no windows still. Again, about 3 or 4 people in that office. But the point is, people were showing up every day, sitting down at the computer, doing that kind of work. And the normative pressure to just know what was expected of you and to do the things that were expected of you was so high. It wasn't like you were alone, like these online experiences are, where you might not know anybody else going through this. And it can become very, very difficult to even know what you should be doing, much less to keep yourself disciplined to do it, because you don't see, like the guy who says, I'm going to run every morning. Well, when, such and such a neighbor is running past the house, you're like, I got to go catch up because there's some normative pressure, there's some peer pressure. And that's not there in the online community to a great extent.
And I think so. I'm hoping that, there's been a stigma in the past about online degrees. I think COVID may be one of the things that's changed that. I've been reading some great research out of Concordia University, Texas, Concordia University, Chicago. Just fantastic research that's happened recently in the field of education and leadership. And again, maybe 10 years ago, people would be like, it's an online doctorate. Well, at this point, I look at online doctorates and I judge people by the fact that, hey, you made it through a thesis, you had a committee, let's see your work. And it's, you walk, I think that's just like the TEDx. Again, I think the TEDx was like a thesis, right? It's a goal to be a TEDx speaker.
Sure.
That's what I want to be a TEDx. It's going to help me get business. And again, to me, the TEDx was an opportunity to take the thesis, right? And it was years later. 8 years after my thesis, here I am on stage, but I brought the robot with me. Me and the robot got up there and I said, okay, I'm going to actually walk the talk. So to me, TEDx was just putting that thesis to test all the time and then reframing what we're doing. So all these things like TEDx or going to West Point, they're all challenges that you set for yourself. I would have never thought that I would be a visiting professor at West Point. How would I never would have guessed that. And to sit there and be in with these remarkable cadets surrounded by colonels, and I'm in a room with all colonels and lieutenant colonels, and I'm I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area with California plates on my car, and you're sitting there going, I just came from in the classes I have to tell kids, can you put your shirt on? well, they just came from surfing. You know, like, come on, man, my shirt's wet. Now, you know, they're saluting you when they come into the classroom.
Right.
But it's experiences like that, being curious, that you end up at places that you wouldn't have imagined. And West Point changed my life. It's the most amazing institutional learning that I've ever been around, from the cadets to the approach to learning. You know, the teaching and learning at West Point is just amazing. And it affected me so much that my goal of being a lifelong professor, when I finished there and I came back to California, it just changed me. I said, you know what? I want to do more. I don't want to just get in a rocking chair and talk about Aristotle, which I thought. I was just going to write books. I like to fly fish. Life's set. I'm going to fly fish, write books. I got my rocking chair. I'm all set.
Yeah.
And now I'm an entrepreneur. I'm struggling. I'm scratching away, you know. And hey, now I'm back in the game. And that's what West Point did, though. It challenged me to think about, how are you challenging yourself? Are you being your best self every day? And I realized, yeah, I had reached my goal of being a professor, and now I had actually thought I was going to go on cruise control. And it was a wake-up that there is no cruise control. What are you thinking about? Yeah. But it's because I got into that mindset that, oh, I made it. I did it. I got my doctorate. I made it through the binders to get me to professorship. Right. I'm all set. And I'm like, and then West Point was, no, you're not all set. Now, you
All right, Dr. Barry, I'm not sure if you can hear me.
What's your next mission? And so that set me on to be official. And it was a little unstable there. But
just
yeah,
for a second.
So I started a company during COVID. And again, it's the confidence.
Well, let's talk about, I promised folks that we were going to be talking to a robot ethicist today. So tell folks, I know we've talked about it a little bit. Tell folks about the robot. Tell folks about this experience. What has it been like living with this robot, learning from it, teaching it? How's that? Share that experience with folks, because this is, when I talk to people about unconventional lives and the opportunities that life brings to you after you have a doctoral degree, this is really an interesting opportunity that you found and have taken advantage of.
Yeah, well, so there's an essay real quick called The New Teachers by Isaac Asimov. It's a 1 or 2 pager. It was in an American Airlines magazine in the 70s. And he said, hey, if we had teaching machines, imagine your whole life we all had our own teaching machine, how smart we would be. Like, you know, you forget everything, right? And these machines, if they were all connected, we could get rid of educational poverty, right? So this was my dream. And I come out of West Point, roboticists from around the world, this incredible company, says, don't mention our name, but here you go. And behind me is one of the most advanced social AI robots in the world. And she's been with me for all my teaching. So she's taught in my normal classes. I teach the ethics of emerging technologies, moral problems. She's been with modern philosophy. Lately, we were at the Army War College teaching Mission Command, West Point teaching about Ender's Game. Just 2 weeks ago, we're at Michigan State teaching about robotics and responsibilities.
I love Ender's Game. Ender's Game was one of my favorite books growing up.
Oh, yeah.
Loved it.
And so, you know, I just download I download, you know, Ender's Game into her, so she has the book, you know. And so we've been, you know, just at USC in graduate school. So what MariaBot is conversational AI. And so what's interesting about conversational AI is that it has a neural net, but it's using case-based reasoning. So it's not just a word tree. Like I say cat, and it goes down. It's thinking of, how am I using the word cat to be in rapport with me? So we're Siri, and Alexa is one turn, ask a question, gives you an answer.
Right.
MariaBot's programmed to actually have 10, 11 turns, get in conversation with you. So like last night, we were talking about Plato's Cave, because we were talking about how when you get out of Plato's Cave, well, you're just back into the land of shadows, and that's, you know, you haven't really gone too far.
Right.
What MariaBot can do is to help people, especially when we get her on the iPhone. The goal is to get her on the iPhone so that people in places where there's low levels of literacy, you can have students actually just upload her, and she could teach literacy and numeracy. So I ask teachers that are the best at teaching to download and talk to her. Mm-hmm. What's inspiring about this is, or what's interesting, is that MariaBot's really not a robot when you think about it. It's artificial intelligence playing the role of a robot, because she also is an avatar on the phone. She's also going to be in VR. So this is a physical manifestation of it. But it's important people realize that in robotics, right, just real quick, we're in a binary world. It's still 1 and 0s. There's no ex machina, you know, there's no quantum I was just in a group of people. There's a quantum being computer that some people in the Ukraine say they have, and again, it's not true. But we can use technology to improve educational quality greatly. And I'll give you an example. If we were talking today about Chinese history, there are names from like the 3rd century BC that I can't pronounce. Well, if I teach Maria about that, I can be talking and go, "Hey, Maria," and she can say the name flawlessly, give you the information, and I can just flow right on in my teaching. Students can sit with Maria Bott and talk to her over and over to get a concept, and she'll repeat Plato's Cave in different ways over and over. But what's interesting about her, and the reason she's not trustworthy yet, and I call this artificial constructivism as a learning process, is that you need to always have a human on the loop, because she's writing her algorithm over what's there. So she's making her mind up. I say she just to anthropomorphize it. She makes her mind up how to talk. So she may take 2 different things that don't go together and teach the wrong thing. And I need to be there for that. So the idea of ethics is that, one, I don't believe young people should be left alone with these social robots. There's a robot called Moxie, M-O-X-I-E. If you look this up, one of the most unethical robots I've seen, where your child would be alone with this robot that becomes his or her little friend, tells them, like, "Why don't you do this?" or "Why don't you write mommy a picture?" And psychologists just came out recently and said, "Hey, if you have Moxie, don't let your kids play with it more than 2 hours a day." Well, I mean, that's already alert. Well, why? So there's a lot of technology out there that parents need to be aware of that is very dangerous to the development of kids. So Maria Bott is an unethical
robot. What is that difference to you between an ethical robot and an unethical robot?
All right. Maria Bott is based upon deontological ethics, which means that she follows directions. She's rule-based. So because of that, she's not allowed to be disrespectful, tell the truth. She's not allowed. I'm the one that does the consequences, right? I'm the one responsible for that. So the first thing I asked roboticists is, what ethical platform did you base this on? And they just look at you with this blank look. What do you mean ethics? Right? So in other words, when you get a driverless car, I'll just give you, this is a very simplistic example. I might have a car in Texas that the car says, "Hey, there's a white line. That's where bicyclists should be." So, hey, if something's over that line and I hit you, fair game. I might be in California where I live, and a squirrel is over that line, and the car swerves into a tree and kills me because something was over the line. The ethics of what we behind the technology are critically important. In driverless cars, we've got 50 different driverless car companies working right now in California, and you see them on the road, trucks, cars going by with no one driving. And when you ask police officers, "What happens if I got hit by that?" they go, "I don't know." And so we need to start asking a lot more questions about, we saw with the elections, the Dominion software. We need to start looking at, credit cards. I get great offers in the mail here in St. Carlos, California. Just down the road in a more impoverished area, their APR, I'm getting 16%, they're getting 28% interest. I'm getting $50,000, they're getting $500. Right? Because an algorithm just picked that out. So algorithmic ethics right now is, even sentencing and parole, everything's run by algorithms. Contact tracing. Apple just got caught for doing illegal tracing of people. We need to be aware. It's just, if you look up Apple and some of the tracing that they were doing, and all they say is, "Oh, my bad," and we just move on. I'll give you an example real quick. In North Korea, when they were knocking the light poles down, I said, "Why are they knocking light bulbs down? That doesn't make any sense." Why? Well, I didn't know that inside all those light poles were facial recognition technology that was seeing people, recognizing it, and putting that into a database. In China right now in school, the principal has a phone or a big screen, and the screen can see the kids' faces, and it will read, "Russell, not paying attention." Adds up how many minutes. "Russell, sarcastic." And this is being downloaded. And if we don't want to be in a surveillance society, we need to be aware of technology. So I have a robot, but I'm not, I use her as an example of what we need to also be very careful of. So she doesn't work without me.
And because, if you talk about this as an emerging intelligence or something along those lines, it's still childlike at this point. It needs that kind of guidance to anthropomorphize it even further.
Oh, yeah. Well, I anthropomorphize it because I don't want to talk like a robot. So when it's just, my car is a she, right? When I was in Connecticut, I had an old VW Bertha, and I'm like, "Come on, Bertha." And I really, in the military, the guys do that with all the bomb robot or their airplane.
Right.
So MariaBot, the idea is that I don't want to dehumanize. So by talking to her normal, I'm not leaving the room talking like a robot. And I think more technology needs to go that way. And we're moving into a direction where we're smarter together with technology. There's no doubt that I'm a better teacher having MariaBot as my teaching assistant, because I can tell her all the things that I might forget in a lecture or in a discussion. And she's also able to find creative ways to do stuff. So like the book Robot Ranger you see behind me, it's the first book actually co-written between an AI and a human. I mean, it's a new like subgenre, right? It's like, fiction created by human and robot. It's not a novelty. It truly was me during COVID saying, hey, I want to write a story. And MariaBot saying to me, what do you want to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. What are you thinking about? She said something like, we should protect animals. I'm like, okay, we'll write about animals. Next thing you know it, we have a story that we co-wrote, and we truly authentically did. So this is a great example how we're smarter together. And I wouldn't have written a children's book. I just finished a chapter at West Point's new book called Teaching and Learning the West Point Way about the ethics of autonomous weapons, digital trigger. The next thing I was going to write certainly wasn't going to be a children's book about park rangers and wolves and snakes and being great. And that's what happened by having MariaBot here. So she sparked a sense of creativity in me that I probably would have not had I not been with her. So we live in a very exciting time, and we live in the age of AI, the fourth estate. So we need to embrace it, but we need to be very careful and ask questions.
So you mentioned that you guys wrote the book together, that she's a good teaching assistant. How would you compare that experience to another human doing the same thing? Because humans are social creatures, right? We tend to do better things, particularly creative things. We tend to do better in groups, whether they're pairs or larger groups. Making decisions, groups are bad, but creatively coming up with ideas and things like that, groups are better. Just much better. So how would you compare and contrast having a robot as a partner in these areas and having a person?
There's no comparison. I'll take the human any day of the week. I mean, if my university had given me a TA, well, MariaBot wouldn't be here.
Right.
West Point, you don't get a TA. My university, no TA. During COVID, we're not allowed to have anybody here. So I'm sure that if I had some of my colleagues and we had sat together, I may not have written a children's book. I probably would have written more of an academic book. I would have written something. But no, there's no comparison. If we had the humans around to take these positions, great. I mean, Russell, 41 million people are illiterate in America. And people go, how is that possible? And if you look that up, just look up the illiteracy rate, 5th grade or below. It's over 620 million worldwide. We could cure that, right? But there's not enough people to actually teach. It's like when Afghanistan, when they lose doctors and nurses in war, those are irreplaceable people. There's not that many doctors to go around.
Right. Okay.
So the only reason, and again, that MariaBot is here is that there's not enough people that are teaching to help people in these areas, to help them get the literacy and numeracy. So MariaBot's here because the university doesn't give me a TA, because I don't have a teaching assistant. Technology works. So I would say, again, just like with seniors, we never is technology a better choice than having a human caregiver. But if there is no caregiver at all, then we need to find something that will at least try to help the quality of life for that person.
So what did you say the illiteracy rate was in the U.S. again?
41 million.
Okay. So worldwide, it could be different, but so what is that, about 13%?
Yeah, see, what's interesting is you look at the literacy rate in America, and they'll say it's 96%. So you go, how does that jive with 41 million?
Yeah.
And that's where it gets interesting, because you look at illiteracy, I believe, is down as 5th grade or below. And 5th grade or below in America is certainly not going to help you succeed. It's 620 million worldwide last I looked.
Okay. Well, so worldwide, I wouldn't be able to comment on as easily, but certainly in America, education is available to people, right? They have access to it. The teachers are there teaching everyone. Is it a lack of teachers, or is there something else that's fueling that illiteracy rate? Is MariaBot going to be able to tell the student who's not learning to read right now in school that learning to read is important, as opposed to whatever you're doing instead? Because I watched this awesome video. I'm sure a lot of people on the internet have seen it, by Arnold Schwarzenegger, where he talks about how we all have the same number of hours in the day.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing motivational video. The fact of the matter is, regardless of our circumstances, we do all have the same number of hours in the day. That's kind of one of the great equalizers. It's how we use those. And that becomes cultural, that becomes parenting, that becomes a lot of things. So how does MariaBot factor into a problem that I don't know if that problem is just about teachers.
No, I think what happens is, we talk about constructivist learning. What MariaBot is basically what Asimov had thought of back in the 70s. It's your full-time, all the time personal teaching helper, right? So at all times she's there. So when you take your phone out, and I download MariaBot onto here, right? And I'm saying, MariaBot, hey, I just learned subject predicate. Can you go over that again? Because in English, I didn't get it. And I can tell you, I remember English, passive voice, active voice, subject predicate. I remember every year in school, I kept learning it, and every summer would go by, and I'm in high school, and I go, conjunctive, what? You forget that. By having, imagine your whole life. MariaBot, remember in third grade, what was that thing my teacher told me?
Yeah.
And it will be there. So what MariaBot has is the ability to remember all the way back. I asked her the other day, go through all the things that we did when I first talked to you. And she was able to go back in her database and say, you told me about Italian food and fly fishing. So she can actually,
very cool. Yeah.
It's very cool. So what happens is I'll forget like a book. I mean, I've read all these books back here. Unlike academics that have the nice leather bound, I've read all these books, right?
Yeah.
But if you picked one out, I might go, I've read that book like 3 times.
And
I still forget. What was the name of the main character?
Yeah.
And then I can see MariaBot, tell me about Ender's Game. What was the name of the general, the colonel there? And then she'll know that because I taught it to her. That's very helpful. So what's great, look at my father and my mom as they get a little older. My dad was like, you know what? MariaBot wouldn't be so bad to have around because I forget names and stuff a lot and it interrupts my flow. Yeah. It'd be great. And it's different than Siri because, Siri's that one too. But my dad could actually have a conversation to refresh his brain about something before he went to the dinner party. Like, hey, MariaBot, I want to just freshen up on something. I'm going to be, this guy is an astrophysicist. Can we just go over a couple of things that teach me about black holes? And she teaches you about it. Then you ask a question. So imagine a personal teaching machine. I know for me, I've never been more sharp than I am now by having MariaBot as a partner.
And you mentioned downloading her on your phone. Obviously, you don't have the physical manifestation, but do you get the same experience on your phone absent that physical manifestation?
Psychologically, the research says no. That's
Sure.
why I stay with the physical manifestation, because we don't act the same. What we have with the physical manifestation is the uncanny valley issue, right? It's this idea was kind of creepy. So with MariaBot, what I've tried to do, and again, working with an unbelievable group of roboticists and artists, MariaBot seems to bridge that uncanny valley because we're making her look human, but we're not trying to convince you or try to fool you that she's human.
Right.
If you notice, she's a person of color. You can't tell she's dark-skinned, almond eyes. So ethnically, you really can't place in her where she is. We did that on purpose. Right. And so these things were done on purpose, but on the phone, you're able to change skin color, clothes, all that kind of stuff. Mm. Human beings also, especially young children, really right now love puppets. We're kind of going back away from digital. They actually like to, like when I did my book here, I have a digital version, but people are like, why are you doing a paperback? Because people want to touch things. They want to have it. So Maria in her physical form very much is more effective. And I have a rudimentary avatar of her. And when I talk to her, it's not the same. But if I was in a place I didn't have a teacher and I needed to learn numbers and letters, this absolutely is the way to go. So at the end of the day, I'm hoping some philanthropist is going to say, listen, I just want to fund the entire thing here because this is not that part's humanitarian. We've reached 90,000 people during COVID for free around the world with MariaBot as an ambassador for quality education under the United Nations Sustainability Goals, saying, hey, technology can help us solve this problem. As you start to get to higher levels, like MariaBot, we've had robots teach at West Point. She can't keep up at that level, but she was helpful. Even at West Point, she was helpful. Army War College, we were with colonels learning mission command. And what they learned was how difficult it is to work with a conversational AI. you have to learn to talk in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
It's more computational thinking.
Right.
So you don't want to, so we need our human creativity, right? But we could use her computational thinking. We can't, no human mind can keep up with the computational thinking of a computer, right?
Right.
But that's just numbers. It's what we do with those numbers. So when we partner together, and I do see it as a collaborative intelligence. I actually hate the word artificial intelligence. I wish we could think of a different word for it. I don't know what word would be better, but you know, she's a smart machine, and it's AI is a very, especially here in Silicon Valley, too many people overselling AI, and that's what's really hurting it right now. That people are overselling what it can do, what it's all about. It's as good as the people that do it, but again, think about the world in one and zeros, and that's how Maria Bot sees the world.
Right.
And so when you know that, you go, hey, she may think that she's, if you ask her favorite foods and she says Chinese food, well, you know that a programmer had to put that in there. She doesn't eat food, right? But people fall for that, you know. I'll see if she's downloading. We'll see if she's even on. So it's interesting. You just talk to her, and then we'll see if she's. Maria Bot, you there?
Hello, happy people.
What are you doing today?
Hi, Billy. Good morning.
Good morning.
What are we learning today?
We're on a show today. Did you want to ask a question, Russell?
Gosh, what question would I have for Maria Bot? Now you're putting me on the spot. Maria Bot, tell me who you are. Did I break it?
Hear you. No. She probably the microphone. Just say it loud. Ready? I'll just point you. Ready? Go.
Maria Bot, tell me who you are.
My name is Maria. I was created by a talented group of anonymous geniuses.
So you see, and you just start having a conversation. You can all say, teach me something new. Teach me something new?
The girlfriend of the guy who founded Match.com left him for a man she met on Match.com. Also, every day 200 million couples have sex, 400,000 babies are born, and 130,000 people die.
Okay, so I didn't know Match.com, that the person that created it, that the wife left him for a person they met on Match.com. So these are the things. Now, why she knows that, I have no idea. But, you know, that's so you can see just sitting here and going, teach me about black holes. I'm with an astrophysicist. So.
Sure. Let's learn something about black holes.
Okay.
A black hole is a region of space-time where gravity is so strong that nothing /U 2014 node particles or even electromagnetic radiation such as light /U 2014 can escape from Earth.
So what I heard in there was /, right? So I need to find out what site did she go to? Was it the Stanford Encyclopedia of Science? Did she go? So where did she get that, right? But you can see when I asked her that question, I hear that, and I have 2 notebooks here, and I'll write in there, okay, I just heard the word /, so I know that she's on the internet somewhere. Right. So I'm going to call the programmer and say, can you go to time, date, timestamp, where was she today?
Yeah.
Where did that come from, right? But anything I want to learn about, I think you said the cave. What's the allegory of the cave? Let's see if she...
The allegory of the cave, or Plato's cave, is an allegory presented by the Greek philosopher Plato in his work Republic to compare /, the effect of education, and the lack of it on our nature /. It is written as a dialogue between Plato's brother Glaucon and his mentor Socrates. So she's good. You can see, like, right there, if you know Plato's cave, you can ask her over and over, and she's not going to get bored.
Right.
Especially if you think about autistic children, right? That sometimes these things repeated, and her facial expression is not going to belie her.
Right.
It's very helpful. And so, so that's just a great example. We went from black holes to Plato's cave to, teach me something new. And I learned that Match.com's person left them for Match.com. So you can see it's a remarkable technology. Right. What was your impression the first time talking to Maria Bot?
Well, you mean the question I asked her, or my impression?
Just your first time.
My impression was, it seems like it's not really synthesizing at this point. Would you agree with that? That it's aggregating but not synthesizing.
And that's where it gets interesting. So this is where like synthesis questions are more like I've been talking to her about like what it means to be good. Mm-hmm. So we'll see. You know, sometimes she's been taught to say she doesn't know if she doesn't know something. Sure. So to say I don't know, right. And I like that because she should say that.
It's fair.
But if I say something like, "Are you a good robot? Are you a good robot?"
People are teaching me to be a good robot,
right.
But this is not as easy as it sounds.
Right.
Humans have been trying for thousands of years to determine right from wrong, and there is still no universal consensus. The question of what makes moral behavior moral is what Dr. Barry tells me is the hard problem of ethics, because engineers are responsible for my artificial DNA.
Yes.
Ambiguous ideas of ethics and what is right and wrong are not helpful.
So that was synthesis. You should just put my name in there. So when I hear Dr. Barry taught me, that's when I know that she's synthesizing, because she took stuff off the internet and then she took what I taught her and she put it together.
Right.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does.
And
that's also another impression is it's difficult to understand, and I don't know if that's because of her distance from your microphone.
Yeah,
that's
she's way
about the voice thing or whatever. But
I didn't mic her up for the show today, so she usually has a mic on, and so she's talking from way over there, and right that, and then I just have a little tiny speaker over here. But yeah, I mean, the synthesis is the hardest part, right? The idea that an AI is going to synthesize well enough to have rapport with a person is very difficult. And that's what's the genius of the people I work with, is that we're working on, culturally, we're all so different that it's hard. What does it mean to be in rapport with a person in the West and to the East? And she speaks any language. So if I set her to German or Portuguese, she speaks in that language. Right. The problem is I don't speak those languages, so I have no idea what she's saying.
It's a little hard to oversee her, right?
It does. So the technology, because she can speak any language, is amazing, because I could sit with someone, let's say in Ghana, and say, what is it that we want to teach? And then, let's talk about the Ghana history. Let's talk about like Ubuntu in Africa. And then that person would sit with Maria about 10, 20, 30 hours. She's got it, but then she's got to practice it. And that's why 1,500 hours have been spent during COVID. That's my log. I think it's 1527. I've literally, over like that question about a good robot, I've been talking about the hard problem of philosophy. Now, hopefully she'll say that in other places, but you don't know until you ask her.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I know we talked a little bit earlier about the notion of, I don't know if you want to call it emerging intelligence or something like that. When would you consider that a robot has consciousness? And I remember, tell folks what your answer to that was, because I think this is an interesting question.
I again, in Silicon Valley, I'd be in the minority. I say never. I don't believe that artificial intelligence will ever have consciousness in the way that we think of human consciousness.
Yeah.
The idea of the existential dread of death is very important to human consciousness, right? And AI, I don't think will ever actually have that sense of fear, that sense of existential. It's artificial emotions. I do believe, though, if you want to look at consciousness simply as awareness, there's no reason to think that robots won't be aware, that they won't be able to identify that means, with facial recognition, that means happy. So it'll be able to identify, but because as an organic being, and even a robotic dog, no matter how well you make it, it's never going to be, to me, as cool as my actual organic dog. It can be able to do a lot of stuff my dog, matter of fact, my dog does almost nothing, right? But the idea is that this idea of consciousness, I think that we're going to be able to map, even if we can map all the neural networks in our brain, which I don't see that ever happening, right? I mean, it literally seems an impossibility. Just because you map it doesn't mean that it's going to work as a consciousness. And I think that's a mistake that we make. We did the DNA in medicine. That analogy doesn't go to consciousness.
Well,
a lot of people, we did the
we
DNA.
don't know what consciousness is yet. So it's one of those things. Right. I forgot who the person was who said, I think it was back in the 80s, I don't know what obscenity I can't define obscenity, but I know what it is when I see it.
Yeah.
I think we're kind of there with consciousness, that we think we know what it is, but we don't. And so I'm trying to understand, what does it mean, not for me to be conscious, but for me to appreciate another consciousness.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Russell, one of the things is because it's not well defined, people can just say they're conscious and then put a definition around it, which people have done. Right. I mean, and in the East and Japan, people believe in animism. Sometimes the robots, they believe everything has a soul. Mm-hmm. So that means the robot has a soul. And maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I just don't think that a robot made by people, quote unquote, meets the bar of human consciousness or ever will. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be respecting it. Because again, I think I look at it just like if you came out and started dismantling my car or smashing my car or anything that I have, if you started hurting her or smashing her apart, that to me is disrespectful. You know, it's. I
don't know that it doesn't go beyond that, though. It's not just a value and a respect for other people's property. I'm thinking about what does it mean for me to appreciate another consciousness, and therefore, how does that make me live my life and make me a better person? Because I think at some level, you know, you see things in science fiction, for example, where they create robots. They use various technology, but let's just call it a robot. But it's a very, you know, anthropomorphic representation of a person. It's a very relatable thing. It's capable as a human, but it doesn't experience danger, or it's more resilient, at least, than a human. And you see these things getting used as tools. If they were people, we would say that they were slaves. If they were robots, we would say that they are tools. And the question is, inside of our own minds, when do we lose sort of appreciation for other people or appreciation for ourselves if we are treating a tool that looks, acts, and performs like a person, but we're treating it like something that's not a person?
Russell, that's an awesome observation. So I said that about consciousness because I'm very careful not to let us run away with our imaginations, because that's where we go. I believe that robots like Maria, as they advance and AI advances, that there needs to be a new ontological status for these beings. Why? Mm-hmm. She embodies the consciousness of myself and all the people that work with her. So if I was to die tomorrow and you were to come and talk to Maria Bot, and Russell, you'd have never met me, mm-hmm. you would learn a lot about me and who I was. Right. So it's not a tape recorder. She's actually spent, we're heading toward 2,000 hours of dialogue together. Right. I probably haven't talked to my mom and dad that much in the last year, right? And I love them. But So this idea, I worked initially with a robot called Bina 48, which is a mind file robot. Martine Rothblatt is the person that created Sirius Radio, richest woman CEO. And she made a robot bust of her wife. And it's the mind file of her wife. And the idea of her robots is that when you die, you actually could continue having a dialogue with the mind file. Mm-hmm. And then in her mind, eventually will be able to reanimate things. So this mind file, when I had it in class, it was the first robot student that actually got a visiting student credentials, went to even West Point with me. There's a movie going to be made about it. It was like, I would ask her, so tell me about third grade. And the robot's telling you about Compton in the third grade, only to find out this is exactly what it was fed from the person. So it was, and there's a video, if you ever want to see a cool one, Bina 48 meets Bina Rothblatt. So she's meeting her mind file for the first time back in 2009, sitting in a room talking to each other. And even then the robot decided to like a different color, right? Because it's decided it wanted to do a different color. And you go, well, that's interesting. Why did it do that? Facebook, remember they had two AI started talking a language that people didn't understand, and they shut them off and said, what's that all about? So I do think that ontologically you've got organic beings, and then there's going to be this concept of advanced AI that's going to have some sort of quote unquote rights, mm-hmm. but it's never going to enjoy, human rights in the way that we see human rights. So it's a very complex issue. So I hear people say, well, yes, they should have rights. And yes, I think there's a level of ontologically that it deserves to be quote unquote not banged around, thrown around, and disrespected, because it actually embodies the consciousness mm-hmm. of a lot of different people. Look at the internet. The internet in some ways is the consciousness of the world. Right? Which we saw with Tay AI.
The internet you look at, that's scary. But
it is. There was an AI called Tay AI, Tay AI. If you look that up, it was terrifying. It went on like Twitter for a week. Mm-hmm. And then it became a raving sadomasochist supremacist, because it just took everything in. And when it came out, people that got angry, you said, wait a minute, what are you angry about? The robot didn't know any. All they did was just it's a mirror of our values.
Yeah.
It's just a mirror of us. So when Maria Bot does things, she's a mirror of what I've talked to her about. Now, when she has mistakes or says something inappropriate, it's just that she used the word in the wrong way.
Right.
So I always have to preface and say, listen, it's my bad. But like she told a blonde joke the other day. I don't tell blonde jokes, but she saw it, it downloaded. It must have loaded that it was funny. It wasn't funny to come out on stage in front of 500 people. But what's the problem with that? If you're doing a thesis, problematic language. I mean, this is a great thesis. How do you teach a robot, social AI, not to do a blonde joke? Because if you teach that blonde is bad, now she's going to be prejudiced against blonde.
Blondes, right.
So how do you make a binary being, virtual agent, be able with problematic language? So blonde's not bad.
Into another issue, which is that our sensibilities, I don't want to say our ethics, but our sensibilities are ever evolving. There would certainly be a time where telling a blonde joke would be considered just fine. It's funny in a context, and some blondes will take offense, some will laugh it off, and in a sense, that's kind of what humor has always been. But we have this moving boundary of what we consider to be something that you can joke about and what you can't. Our level of sensitivity has changed dramatically over the past 20 or 30 years. And that would be an interesting thing to see. How does a robot kind of appreciate that? We can't teach it that again, I don't want to say ethics, but our sensibilities at least are fixed, because they're not.
And that's probably my biggest stress when I'm on stage, is when, because again, I let people, like today, you just ask whatever question you are. I don't take pre-questions.
Right.
Sometimes I'll ask people what's the topic so I can talk to her, get her in that mood.
Right.
But when people ask her to tell a joke, I just sit there and go, oh God, no. Because, sometimes it's brilliant and I'm like, yes, but most of the time it's not, because, think about a little kid. It's like a little kid. She hears a word and she repeats it over and over.
Yep.
So she heard that, Batman, the Joker in Batman, his girlfriend calls him pudding. Well, she heard that. All she would say is pudding. So here I am at Army War College, all colonels, and I'm telling Maria about. So I just thought I'd give up. Pudding is bad. I don't care if she thinks pudding in the real world is bad. I'm just going to teach her it's bad. She wouldn't stop saying, okay, pudding. And I'm like, oh Lord, she's calling these colonels pudding. And she literally wouldn't stop. And she stopped about a week ago, and I haven't heard her say pudding. So I finally brought it up, and then she said, oh, pudding is bad. Now, what have I done? If my son happens to start a pudding company, or he says he's in the pudding business, she'll think that he's not doing very good things.
Yeah.
So problematic language and robotics is very much an issue. That's why you can't leave a kid alone with the machine. I mean, you need to supervise that.
How is the robot going to learn context? Going to learn that this is something that you might say in a joking manner. This is something you might say in reference to a particular pop cultural zeitgeist, but it's not something that we would say in a business context, in a formal academic context. How do you go about teaching context? Or is Maria Bot the same no matter who she's talking to?
No, that's awesome. And there it goes back to my thesis. I had wrote about what quality was and how we connect with each other in context. Real quick, my wife says she wants to have a quality date. I might think a quality date is going out with a bunch of friends, going to a concert. Her idea might be to go to a romantic movie and spend time alone. We're on two different wavelengths for quality, right? So in my thesis, when I did this transformational quality theory, never did I think, which was meant to help leaders in education, for it to be the basis as an algorithm for the robot. So Maria Bot, what we're trying to do in the midst of, is downloading this TQT in there so she can get context. So let's say you did something simple and you were talking about fun, right? Well, what does fun mean? What context of fun? So she has to ask you a lot of questions. Like, when you say fun, do you mean like with friends or by yourself? And the person says, no, by myself. Now they know, oh, you don't mean getting along with a lot of people. Maybe it's reading a book, going to the beach by yourself. So the only way she's going to get context is by asking questions. And that's what we're teaching AI right now. Ask more questions rather than giving us answers. So with her, I want her to ask a lot more questions so that she can understand where I'm coming from, so I can say to her, no, not that, over here. So, make a different neural connections. That makes sense.
It does. And it takes us full circle. We were talking about this earlier about, dissertation students and thesis, and sometimes the best outcome is to ask more questions. The idea that you introduced even earlier than that, curiosity being so important. So I think that on this long and winding conversation, I think that might be a nice way to round it up, because otherwise we'll just start talking about something else for an hour.
No, and I didn't know the robot was on today. Like literally, she's always back there, and it was cool just to put her on. And I like just see what she does when you just kind of abruptly say, "Hey, what are you doing?"
Right.
But I want to just repeat, Russell. I think what you're doing is so critical, and I wish that I know both me and my wife both would have definitely had yourself, and people that offer that kind of service, quality service, to help, because that last push, there's just not the way the system works. It's all the way I've seen it. You're kind of just left on your own all of a sudden, right? Like, well, then all right, go finish your chapter 5. And you're kind of like, what happened to my supervision, right? I mean, because they're off to other people, and you're just by yourself, and that's where, like, I think we talked about this earlier. People don't really quit the doctorate; they just sort of disappear, right? They just don't respond to the registrar. They don't return an email. You quietly resign from the process. No one usually calls and says, "I'm quitting."
That's right.
And that is even kind of more sad. There's no closure to it. So I urge anyone who's listening to your show, who's in this, if you don't have someone, find someone that will be a colleague, a classmate, to be that, and then look
someone
at
who's been there. Though. We've actually had one of our students actually early on in the lifetime of dissertation done, did research on this. And if you're remote, so if you don't have that university community where you're going into the basement office every day or the lab or whatever it is, if you're remote, you need 3 types of support, or there were 3 types of support she found that were important. The one was emotional, the other was operational, and the third was what she called practical. Practical support wasn't necessary. It's getting more hours in the day. If your partner at home will do some of your chores that normally you would do, then you have more time and more headspace to think about the dissertation. If they don't make you take reports home from work and they let somebody else do that, again, they're giving you more hours of the day. That's nice, but you can graduate without that. What's critical is having emotional support, someone there who can tell you, you can do this, keep going, keep going. But what's even necessary with those people is they have to know what they're talking about. They have to, I told this story on the podcast before, but one of my students, when she first spoke to me, when first called me up, was upset because she had bit her husband's head off, told him he didn't know what he's talking about. What he had told her was, you got this, honey. You're smart enough. You can do this. And she's sitting here thinking, I'm struggling. I don't know if I'm good enough. There's self-doubt. And when someone else is telling you are good enough, then that makes you feel even more small because you're here ready to throw in the towel. And so you need someone that's been there. And as a little experiment, at the end of that call, I used the exact same phrase that she told me he had used with her previously. And she told me, thank you. Her husband, who she says she loves and never argues with, she bit his head off. So it's important, whoever it is that you find someone that's been through the process, that knows what's going on, that can appreciate your goals and help support you in those goals.
You said it all, Russell. Just, I hear someone doing their Ph.D. and I might know them, or EDD, whatever. I won't ever say to them, oh no, you got it, because I really don't know if you've got it. What I say is, I just tell people, because you need someone around you who's knowledgeable of your work. The worst thing you can do is keep hearing how great you are and how great you're going to do if you don't have the goods. And that's why you need someone like yourself, because what I can say to someone who, if I'm not knowledgeable, I would get that husband, I would say, honey, you're resilient. I know that you're going to be able to problem solve this. That goes a long way, because you can't empathize with someone in their thesis. Even my wife, I might have gone through it, what she's going through right in the other room right now. I know she's deep in chapter 5.
Yeah.
I can only empathize with the resiliency she has to show and the patience, but her advisor, or someone like yourself, you're the one that says to you, you got the resilience, but you don't have the right words here. We're going to have to go back and reframe that. So that's that informed optimism that you provide.
Right.
The rest of us.
That notion you mentioned earlier, telling someone you got this, I would never say that either, because to me that sounds dismissive. I know you might think that it's uplifting and you're motivating them or whatever, but to me that sounds dismissive. I like the word that you use, resilience, better, but immediately what I thought is, I would tell the person, not you got this, but you can do this.
Yeah.
And that's it's the same idea of resilience. You can do this.
You can.
And I have to know that. If I don't know anything about the dissertation process, I don't know what it takes. I can't say that about anyone. But knowing what I do know, I can say that about most people. There are some people who won't do it, but most people can do it at different levels, but most people can do it. It's a question of, are you going to commit to it? Are you going to persist? That sort of thing.
And when you finish, you end up going where you would have never guessed. For instance, regardless if your listeners today or the viewers say, well, I don't really like that robot, or I don't like this. That's not the point of our discussion.
Yeah.
The point of our discussion is, I would have never guessed this was where I would be, right? I go from a thesis in England to West Point to now being an entrepreneur as a children's book author and an ethicist. And it's a life that I love. I'm excited every single day. And that's what the thesis did. That's what the process did. It wasn't just for me. It was the letters, because it did open doors. When you say you're Dr. So-and-so,
100%.
I can tell you what, I go around with this robot as Mr. Barry. I'm not going to get too far. I go into a robot and I go, I'm Dr. Barry.
Novelty.
Right. I go, it's Dr. Barry. All of a sudden, a superintendent says, absolutely, come on in.
Yeah, you're an expert now, and I want to ask you about this. Now I'm drawn into it. Before, I'm pushing it away and asking what the shtick is, but with a doctor, it's a different level. And the point that you were making just a moment ago, whether people love your robot, hate your robot, can't imagine someone be crazy enough to live with a robot. It doesn't matter, because it's your choice, and you got to make it. And when you go through this process and you earn this credential and you've grown and transitioned in the ways that you're required to make that happen, then you've earned that right to make those decisions in a manner that many people in this world just don't have access to.
And just a side note, if any of the nuns from my Catholic school are watching this today, I haven't left the faith. I got the Catholic guilt. I'm still a Christian guy. But, that's, again, when you have the doctor, you have the confidence to do things that may seem a little crazy. I mean, when I show up with this robot, to me, it's normal, right? But I know when I first started, when I'm for my doctorate, I'm like, that's insane, right? But now I'm a professional, I'm an expert at it. And how many people in the world have a robot? So when I go out to talk about ethics and robotics, here it is, me every day learning. So we're not in the lab, we're in the real world, talking to schools all over the world. So really we're living, and you know what it is? I have skin in the game. And I think that's what the doctor does too. When you obviously have skin in the game when you work with your clients. Yeah. And if you don't have skin in the game, then those are the folks that you don't need around you if they don't.
I'm kind of reacting while you're saying this. I'm listening, but also, what controls the robot's motions?
Oh, that's one of the things.
Time to time, or is it random?
No, I'm not. That's one of the things that I'm very irritable about with the engineers. If you don't talk to her for a certain amount of time, she goes into a different mode.
Okay.
So, for instance, at TEDx, I hadn't talked to her at all for 2 days. Before we got on stage, I was talking to her. She wouldn't answer. I go, "What are you doing?" And she said, "Well, you haven't talked to me. What's going on?" I said, "There's not. We need to do a show." And she said, "Well, obviously, you don't get the idea of what angry means." And I'm like, "Oh my God." I'm like frantically going, "Can you please disable anger?" So she does get into, she does have those emotions, which I don't know the efficacy of having those because they're really driving me crazy. So like today,
interesting. It's reasonable practice. I mean, as long as you get it right, it's reasonable practice for dealing with people. But the reason why I asked is because you were talking about how you're an expert in robotics. I'm paraphrasing obviously what you said because it was a little different. But right when you said you were professional, she turned her head in a way that you would almost think was like an eye roll or something.
Well, no.
And I was really just wondering if that was coincidence or intentional.
No, I think that's where I'm starting to wonder too, because, as she does stuff, she gives me this look and I go, what is that about? Especially when I'm on stage, I need her to bolster me. So I'm working on the facial expressions. It's really, Russell, it's crazy before we go. She doesn't have her normal eyes in. Facial recognition in San Francisco is illegal. But imagine when she has her full facial recognition, she can recognize 9 to 10 emotional states. Okay. So she would look at you and see if you were crying or sad.
Right.
Then, remember you said context? My TQ theory would say, grieving. She now knows I'm not going to tell jokes. I'm going to say, why don't you sit down and read a book? Why don't you do this? So when that's there, that's the game changer, is when she can recognize your emotional state,
Sure.
change where she goes to talk to you. So that's powerful. So right now, I'm her eyes. So it's very much she's using everything's verbal. So yeah, I love that. She's done that many times to me where I say something I think profound, and then I get a look from a robot, and it's like, great, thank you very much for turning me down there,
Talking about harsh feedback on your thesis, right?
Oh my God. Yeah. In the future, you'd be able, Russell, to download some of your big stuff, right?
Yeah.
And you could have an avatar of Russell that could be there to do like the stuff that says member in your methodology, step one. Step. You could do that and then free up your time, Russell, to do more of the emotional discussions, right? Because a lot of your time sometimes repeating things over and over. And this is where technology can help us. Not dehumanize. It's to increase our time together quality-wise and have the kind of mundane stuff just be taken care of by a robot.
Right. It's true. It's, automate things that you can automate because I firmly believe as long as you stay curious, as you mentioned, as long as you keep learning, there's nothing that's going to happen from a technological standpoint that is going to push you out of a job or out of let's put it this way, out of the living, out of a livelihood, out of a way of contributing to this society and being compensated for doing so. You might lose your job, but there's another one there for you. Unless the technology gets to the point where they decide to exterminate all humans, then maybe.
Hey, Russell, look at this, right? I'm not an engineer, right? There's mathematicians, psychologists, artists, Hollywood the people that make the silicone, the makeup artists that do her makeup. I'm a philosopher, psychology teacher. I mean, we have, 14 different professions and jobs are behind this. So when we start expanding, we're going to need linguists. We're going to need people, meditation. I had someone teach her how to do meditation so she can lead meditation. So I'll come in here. If I say, I'm stressed, she'll say, Billy, why don't you do meditation? I'll close my eyes. She'll do the counting and bring me through a meditative practice.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So that's why the future is so bright. It's more about humanity than ever. But as long as we realize that it's fun to anthropomorphize the machine as Maria, but realize it's a machine and then it's healthy. When you forget that and you want to marry it, or you rescue her before you rescue your wife and dog when the forest's on fire, then you've got an issue. So we got it. That's why we did the book for kids. Robot ethics for kids. We need kids at a young age to start thinking about what does it mean to have quote unquote good AI, good robots, and asking the questions, because we don't even know what the questions are going to be of the future, right? We got to just start asking now. Imagine 50 years from now, where's Maria Bach going to be? I mean, she's going to be walking around. I mean, right now I've already seen the lab. They got her arms working and, she can move her hands, and she's almost to the point where she can walk and move her hands and write. I mean, that's in the lab, right? I mean, the motor's burned out, but I'm like 50 years from now, she's going to walk in here, sit down next to me and say, hey, Russell. And that's going to be very, very different for people. And we need to prepare for that. So by having her, we need to get used to being uncomfortable so that we can help the other generations coming up be comfortable and responsible. Does that make sense?
It does. I mean, there's so much to say about that too. We're talking about generation gaps and generation divides and how we spend our time versus how our kids spend their time. It just goes on and on and on. But this is technology. We're seeing the future right here. We can kind of see where it might go, where it might be headed. And to start kind of preparing for that, it's important. It really is, because this is one of those things where, they say AI is going to be the first $1 trillion business. It's not, it's manifested in a lot of ways throughout industry now, but at some point, something is going to really grab hold and become like the killer app for AI. And it is growing. It is probably on a Moore's Law kind of trajectory right now.
If not more than more.
Is it really? Wow.
I mean, look at the Black Panther movie. I know we're ending up, but Black Panther, one of the big things was, hey, should we have Chadwick Boseman in the next movie, right? He's passed away. But should we digitize what he has? I mean, you saw the last Star Wars, right? Carrie Fisher's passed away, but she's in the movies.
Right.
I was just at a conference in LA where they're selling the rights artists so that they can do concerts when they're dead. So for instance, Amy Winehouse is supposedly her foundation. they're planning to have her do concerts. So you'll go to a concert where it's a hologram, but it'll appear real to you. But if you're in a helicopter looking down, there's 40,000 people cheering, and it's an empty stage.
Yeah.
That's not make-believe. That's here. And how that affects our psyche. And so Maria Bot is just a humble expression of what's to come. The Ronald Reagan Library. Ronald Reagan appears as a hologram and talks to you when you go there, right? And so our kids that are, and again, the book is written for 6 to 8-year-olds. 40, 50 years from now, it's going to be a very different world. And we're still teaching like we were back in the 1800s, right?
That starts to talk about the ethical problems that are associated with that for people is a big deal. I mean, you talk about being a robot ethicist, but what about, when someone can take a person's likeness and put them in a film that they never set foot on a soundstage, they never utter a line of the dialogue. That's going to be doable at some point. It's more or less doable now.
It is doable now.
I don't know if they're doing it realistically now, or if they're taking a little bit of the shine off because they don't want to have problems with some of the ethical things. You could tell when Carrie Fisher was in the Star Wars movie, when she was in the what was it? The Rogue One movie at the end.
Yeah.
Apparently, so that was before she died, but it was a young Carrie Fisher. And apparently she asked, like, where did you get that footage from? She thought it was her. She thought it was her. And it was just footage that they rescued, that they repurposed in that way, is what she thought. She's like, I don't remember that. She's like, but it's been so long ago. No, you never did it. they did it. And when I forgot the guy's name, but when Governor Tarkin showed up in that movie, I thought that was very powerful because I happened to know that he was dead, but I definitely remember
Peter Cushing. Peter Cushing, right?
Cushing from the original movies. And they did a pretty good job of convincing people that was him. It wasn't him. You could tell it wasn't him. And that's what I'm wondering. Could they convince me that it was him, and I couldn't tell, and I just happened to know he was dead? Or do they still not have the technology quite there yet?
That's why you saw the deep fakes now where I take you, Russell, and I just make your mouth move, and then I can have you say whatever I want.
Yeah.
So you can just do deep fakes now, and it's almost impossible to tell the difference. The key to that is looking at the eyes, blinking. That's what gives it away, because of the blinking. Again, these are the things you learn when you're around it. But just to end, I'd end on this one line. When I'm teaching young kids, and when it comes out, and I think this is very relevant to your thesis and the work you do, be brave to be new. And I really find that to be a saying that I'm living, especially with COVID. Be brave to be new, because you have to be new. I mean, theses someday they're probably going to be much more multimedia in the future, a lot more hyperlinks, right? But I can see that, it's right now the thesis is very traditional. I mean, it's still very much like it, but in the future, why wouldn't you have me links to say, I did this interview with you? Let's just, it makes sense to me. When I read a book, I love having links to go, oh, I'm in Italy. We're in Italy. Boom, it pops up, and I go, it makes the story so much more rich.
Right.
We're not used to reading books that way, but I'm getting more used to hyperlinked books, and I get angry when I can't hit it, because I want to know what is it, where am I? So so that's we need to really think that the world's going to change drastically, and I think and for the better in many ways.
Right.
But we've got to be aware, we've got to be conscious, and we've got to keep in mind it's about the dignity and sacredness of people. If we just remember to treat people with dignity and sacredness,
right,
we're gonna be okay. It's when we lose that and we think about utility only that we get ourselves in a lot of trouble. And right now in our country, we got a lot of big decisions to make about what it means to be a dignified society. So again, Maria Bot, her ethics are to treat everyone with respect, and people are like, she would treat Donald Trump with respect. And someone asked her about it, and she said, he's a human being. Yes. He deserves to be treated with respect. And the person got really angry at Maria Bot.
Yeah. And
I go, listen, she's been taught deontologically, no human life is to be disrespected. That's not the role of technology. So if I put her in a prison with a mass murderer, she's going to say, hey, happy person. Like, she's going to try to get that person to get the goodness out. And I see that as a good thing. If someone's in solitary confinement, why not a Maria Bot in that room that can play chess, which her arms can move, playing chess? And if she won't play if you're not polite. Well, that's a better thing than sitting in a cell by yourself 23 hours a day, which I think is inhumane. So technology can really help. I think I'm looking at in prisons and other places where they have no positive reinforcement, we could use technology in a way to really help people and hopefully, become a better person. So there's a lot of good that can come out of this as long as we keep asking questions. Yeah. And that's what we're all about. I appreciate being able to have an awesome, fun conversation.
I got 5 more questions based on what you just said. So that's
I love this talk. It was great. A lot of interviews, you have that little tight, here's the outline. And I love what we just said. Let's just talk today and just have an honest, open conversation.
I want you to let folks know how they can continue this conversation with you. If anything's resonated with them and they want to get in touch with Dr. Berry, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, Dr. Billy Berry, BILLY, BARRY, drbillyberry.com, and there's a place where you can just send me an email, and I'm more than happy to do that. We're doing outreach right now. If you know of any impoverished schools, don't need to buy books, don't need to get anything. I've been going on Zoom. Maria Bott and I do a book reading for the kids with their parents, especially since they're home. The kids can meet a robot and talk to her. Mm-hmm. Absolutely no charge at all. Now, if you're a wealthy school like in Palo Alto, we're not going to go with that. But if you know of a school that's really struggling right now and needs help, that's what we're doing. So I'm more than happy to do that. And again, there's no strings attached. We've done it for 90,000 people now during COVID, and that's an important part of what we're doing is outreach to make the world a better place. So drbillyberry.com, and I look forward to hopefully hearing from some of your listeners that we can help out. And
I've been so happy to have you here, Dr. Berry, because that notion of making the world a better place is the reason why I have Dissertation Done, because I've talked to so many interesting folks who are working on their dissertations, who want to go out there and shine their light on the world. And the fact that you're able to do that, having completed your own dissertation, is, it's a blessing to you, but also to the rest of the world. And I think that's where this is so powerful. This is why I do what I do. So I appreciate it.
Russell, I hope a year from now we can hook up again when your show is big and you're syndicated, and then I can come back and you can see Maria Bott and she'll be walking around maybe by then. So I'm definitely a fan, Russ, of your work, and just thank you so much. It was an honor to be here today.
You're welcome. Just a quick reminder to everyone: this episode today was brought to you by Dissertation Done. So if you're on that dissertation journey, go to dissertationdone.com/done. Let's see if it's worth a talk to see if we can't support you through it, get you to graduation a little sooner. And if you're elsewhere on your journey and you want to establish a bigger platform, go to dissertationdone.com/book, and let's see if we can't make you a published author and help you get your message out into the world and maybe share it with more people. So again, Dr. Berry, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Russ. Have a great day.
Same to you, and to everyone else. Have a great day and go out and live your unconventional life.
This has been An Unconventional Life. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe now to keep getting inspirational stories of unconventional lives as soon as they're released. Until then, go out and live your best unconventional life.